Hello there everybody, Martin here from Affinity for Commander. Today we have 4 spooky scary decks who are going to be battling it out for your enjoyment. So without further ado, let's take a look at those opening hands.
I am playing my Edgar Markov Vampire deck and keep an opening hand consisting of Skull Clamp, Gifted Aetherborn, Sanctum Seeker, Arid Mesa, Battlefield Forge, Nomad Outpost and Sacred Foundry.
I am playing the Scarab God zombie deck, keeping a starting hand of Altar of the Brood, Relentless Dead, Thought Vessel, Thirst for Knowledge, Command Tower, High Market and Polluted Delta.
Callum is playing his Tegwyll Duke of Splendor Fairy deck and starts the game with a hand containing Barrow Naughty, Herald's Horn, Mocking Sprite, Talion's Messenger, Myriad Landscape, an Island and a Swamp.
And finally, Jay is playing his Zhulodok Void Gorger Eldrazi deck. His opening hand is made up of Foundry Inspector, Whisper Silk Cloak, Solemn Simulacrum, It That Betrays, Arch of Orazka, Majoring Network, and a Wastes.
I win the die roll and play a very reflective Nomad Outpost before passing to Alex.
In my turn, I play Command Tower, which I then use to cast Altar of the Brood. Pleased with my play, I pass the turn.
Jay plays a Wastes and ends his turn.
Callum plays Myriad Landscape as his line for turn and passes to Martin.
I begin my turn by playing Arid Mesa and immediately pay a life to sacrifice it. I search my library for Godless Shrine, paying 2 more life to have it enter the battlefield untapped, and tap out to cast Gifted Aetherborn. Edgar Markov's Eminence ability triggers, creating me a 1/1 vampire token, and I pass the turn.
I play Polluted Delta, and Altar the Brood mills the rest of the table for 1. I then sacrifice the fetched land, paying a single life to put a basic swamp into play from my library, and milling my opponents once again. Not yet finished, I cast Thought Vessel, milling Jay, Callum and Martin for a 3rd time, and end my turn.
Jay plays Majoring Network and passes to Callum.
Callum starts his turn by playing a swamp and casts Barrow Naughty, before passing the turn.
In my turn I play Isolated Chapel, which I then use to cast Skull Clamp. I then equip the clamp to my Aetherborn and move to combat. Here I attack Alex with the aforementioned Aetherborn and Jay with my Vampire token, dealing them 3 and 1 damage respectively. I gain 3 life thanks to my Gifted Aetherborn's lifelink, and with nothing more to do, I end my turn.
I play another swamp, forcing my opponents to mill and cast Gravecrawler. Everybody other than me mills, and Jay uses Majoring Network's ability to put a storage counter on itself. Next I use my remaining mana to cast Cemetery Reaper, milling my opponents yet again, and pass to Jay.
Jay plays Arch of Orazka as his land for turn and casts Foundry Inspector before passing.
Callum plays an island and ends his turn without casting anything.
Typical fairy player. I play Spectator Seating and move to combat. Here I once again attack Alex with Gifted Aetherborn and he declares no blocks. Alex takes 3, I gain 3, and I move to my post-combat main phase. Here I cast Sanctum Seeker, creating a vampire token as I do so, and pass to Alex.
I begin my turn by playing Tectonic Edge, milling everybody else for 1, and cast my commander, DJ Scarab God.
Oh, for Urza's sake.
Irrit. Jay, Callum and Martin each mill a card, and I move to combat, where I attack Jay with my Gravecrawler. He elects not to block, taking 3 damage, and I pass the turn.
In his turn, Jay casts Thran Dynamo, to which Callum responds by sacrificing his Telemorphic Expanse. He puts 2 islands from his library into play tapped, and Jay then casts Solemn Simulacrum. Jay searches his library for a Wastes, puts it into play tapped, and ends his turn.
Callum plays an island and casts Herald's Horn. He names Fairy with the Horn's ability and uses his remaining mana to cast his commander, Tegwyll, Duke of Splendor. Moving to combat, Callum attacks me with his Barrow Naughty, and lacking any flyers, I take the 2 damage. Callum gains 2 life thanks to his Naughty's lifelink, and Callum passes to Martin.
I play Bloodstained Mire and then use all of my other lands to cast Whip of Erebos. Moving to combat, I attack Alex with my Clamped Up Aetherborn and Jay with my Sanctum Seeker. The Seeker's ability triggers, draining the rest of the table for 2, and I gain 2 life in this way as well. Jay blocks my knight with his sad robot, and Alex declares no blocks, taking 3 damage. I gain 6 life thanks to my creature's lifelink, and Jay draws a card thanks to his Simulacrum's death trigger. Pleased with my position in the game, I pass the turn.
I start my turn by scrying 2 with my commander's ability, and each of my opponents loses 2 life. Next I play High Market, milling my opponents with 1, and then cast Skull Clamp.
Copycats.
Jay, Callum and Martin each mill once more, and I attach my freshly cast Clamp to Cemetery Reaper before ending my turn.
In his turn, Jay plays 2 of the Spirit Dragon and casts his commander, Zhulodok Void Gorger. Not yet finished, he casts Whisper Silk Cloak and passes to Callum.
Callum chooses not to reveal the top card of his library with Herald's Horn, and plays an island as his land for turn. Next he casts Into the Fey Court, drawing 3 cards, and creating a 1/1 fairy token that can only block creatures with flying.
Bit of a weird restriction, but whatever I guess.
Callum then uses his remaining mana to cast Picklock Prankster, and moves to combat. Here he attacks Martin with his commander and his naughty, to which Martin responds by paying 1 life and sacrificing his fetch land. He puts Severe Triumph onto the battlefield in this way, and damage then occurs. Martin takes 4 damage, Callum gains 2 life, and with nothing more to do, Callum passes the turn.
I begin my turn by playing Battlefield Forge and cast my commander, the one, the only, Edgar Markov.
Pretty sure there's 2 of those now.
Quiet you. Moving to combat, I attack Alex with all of my non-token vampires, and Edgar's ability triggers, putting a +1/+1 counter on each of my creatures.
Such a broken ability.
Alex responds by activating the Scarab God's ability, exiling the Glenalendra Liege in Callum's graveyard, and making a 4/4 zombie copy of it. Everybody other than Alex mills 1 thanks to that annoying altar, and Sanctum Seeker's ability resolves, losing Alex, Jay and Callum 3 life. I gain 3 life in this way, and Alex blocks Edgar with his now 7/7 commander. He then blocks my Aetherborn with his Reaper and takes 4 damage from my unblocked Seeker. I gain 13 life from my creature's lifelink, and Edgar, Gifted Aetherborn and Cemetery Reaper are all destroyed. Alex and I both draw 2 cards thanks to our Skull Clamps, and rather annoyed of Alex's creature pumping trickery, I end my turn.
In my upkeep, Jay, Callum and Martin each lose 2 life, and I scry 2 thanks to my Scarab God's ability. I then play Temple of the False God, milling the rest of the table, followed by Commander Sphere, milling them all again.
Will you stop that?
No. Next, I cast Relentless Dead, milling my opponents for 1 once again. And with Jay still not milling any huge Eldrazi for me to reanimate, I pass the turn to him.
Jay starts his turn by playing Crystal Vein and immediately sacrifices it to add 2 colourless mana to his mana pool. He uses this alongside all of his other mana producers to cast Kozilek the Great Distortion, cascading twice thanks to Zhulodok's ability.
Oh boy.
Jay casts Staff of Completion off his first cascade trigger, closely followed by Forsaken Monument from his second. With that out of the way, Kozilek's cast trigger resolves, with Jay drawing 3 cards in this way. Sadly lacking the mana needed to equip his Whisper Silk Cloak to the Eldrazi Titan, Jay passes the turn.
Callum once again chooses not to reveal the top card of his library with his Horn, and plays a Swamp as his land for turn. Next he casts Talion's Messenger, closely followed by Mocking Sprite.
So many fairies.
Moving to combat, Callum attacks Jay with all of his creatures that are able to do so, triggering his Messenger's ability. He draws, discards, and puts a +1/+1 counter on Mocking Sprite. Damage then occurs with Jay taking 8 and Callum gaining 2, and with no further plays, Callum ends his turn.
I play a mountain, which I then use to equip my Skull Clamp to Sanctum Seeker. Moving to combat, I attack Callum with Sanctum Seeker, triggering their ability and drain the rest of the table for 1. Callum declares no blocks, taking 5 damage, and I gain 5 life from my whip. In my post-combat main phase, I attempt to deal with the Eldrazi problem over on Jay's side of the board by casting Merciless Eviction, choosing to exile all creatures. Jay responds to this by paying 4 life and drawing a card of his Staff of Completion. Sadly for him though, he still lacks a 6 mana spell in his hand to counter my board wipe of Kozilek's ability, and with the sorcery still in the stack, Alex sacrifices his Scarab God to High Market to gain a life. He puts his commander into his graveyard and Merciless Eviction finally resolves, exiling all creatures in play.
How merciless of you.
With the battlefield looking a heck of a lot emptier, I pass to Alex, who responds by casting Thirst for Knowledge. He draws 3 cards, discards 2 non-artifact cards, and puts the Scarab God back into his hand before proceeding to his turn.
In my turn, I play Secluded Courtyard, choosing Zombie, and each of my opponents mills 1. Next, I recast DJ Scarab God, milling my opponents once more, and then attach my Skull Clamp to my commander before passing.
Jay begins his turn by playing a Wastes, and recasts his Many Tentacled commander. He gains 2 life from his Forsaken Monuments, and then casts Desecrate Reality. Jay gains 2 more life, and then cascades twice. He casts Oblivion Sower, gaining 2 life, and exiles the top 4 cards of Alex's library. No lands are among these, so Jay doesn't get to steal any, and Jay casts Skittering Cicada from his second cascade trigger. He gains another 2 life, and exiles Alex's Thought Vessel and Mind Whip of Erebos when Desecrated Reality finally resolves.
So nice of him not to exile one of Callum's lands.
In a hilarious turn of events, Jay has no odd-costed permanents in his graveyard to return to the battlefield of his spell's Adamant ability.
Lol.
But still happy with his play, he ends his turn.
In his turn, Callum puts the Fairy Mastermind on top of his library into his hand with Herald's Horn, then draws a turn. He then plays a Swamp, casts the previously mentioned Mastermind, and casts Midnight Clock. Still not finished, he recasts Tegwyll, Duke of Splendor, and passes to Martin.
I play Blood Crypt, paying 2 life to have the land enter untapped, and cast Utter End. I exile Forsaken Monument in this way, much to the delight of Callum and Alex, and then cast Yeheni, Undying Partisan. Edgar triggers, creating me a 1/1 vampire token, and I use my final land to cast Indulgent Aristocrat, creating me another vampire thanks to Edgar. With a healthy number of blockers on board, I pass the turn, to which Alex responds by activating his Scarab God's ability. This time he exiles the Una, Queen of the Fae, in Callum's graveyard, making a 4/4 zombie copy of her, and everyone other than Alex mills from Altar of the Brood. With no further interruptions, Alex moves to his turn.
In my turn, I scry 1, and all of my opponents lose 1 thanks to Scarab God's ability. Next, I cast Imprisoned in the Moon, targeting Jay's commander, and Jay responds by casting Not of This World. He pays 0 mana to cast the Call the spell, given that Zhulodok has 7 power, and cascades twice. Jay casts Soul Ring and Conduit of Ruin in this way, and decides not to tutor for a big creature with the Conduit's ability, given that it will just be milled and reanimated by me.
Big brain play right there.
Imprison in the Moon is then countered, and I move to combat, where I attack Jay with Una. Unable to block, he takes 4 damage, and I end my turn. Not yet finished casting things in my turn, Jay flashes in Swiftfoot Boots, and then proceeds to his untap step.
Jay plays Ghost Quarter as his land for turn, and casts Pathraiser of Ulamog.
By Urza, when will it end?
He casts Everflowing Chalice, choosing not to kick it, and Ugin the Ineffable from the Pathraiser's cascade triggers, and then equips his Lightning Greaves to the newly cast Eldrazi. Next, Jay activates Ugin's +1 ability, exiling the top card of his library, and creating a 2/2 colourless spirit token. He then moves to combat, attacking me with his Pathraiser. The Eldrazi's annihilate 3 ability triggers, and I sacrifice all of my vampires except for Yeheni. I then declare no blocks, taking 9 damage, and Jay moves to his second main phase. Here he pays 2 life to his staff in order to generate a mana, which he uses to equip Whisper Silk Cloak to Zhulodok. Alex responds to this by exiling Callum's Halo Forager with a Scarab God's ability, creating a 4/4 copy of the fairy. He pays 1 mana in order to cast the Path to Exile in my graveyard, exiling Jay's commander before the cloak can be placed upon him, and Jay puts a waste into play from his library before passing to Callum.
Callum starts his turn once again, refusing to reveal the top card of his library, puts an hour counter on Midnight Clock, and plays Darkwater Catacombs. He then realised the Midnight Clock should have gotten hour counters placed on it every upkeep, and not just his own, and we let him put an additional 3 counters on the artifact like the lovely people we are. Next, Callum casts Puppeteer Clique and used their ability to put the Olivia Crimson Bride in Martin's graveyard onto the battlefield under his control. Moving to combat, Callum attacks Martin with his own Olivia and Tegwyll, putting the Glenalendra Archmage in his graveyard into play tapped and attacking Martin with Olivia's ability.
Talk about hitting a man whilst he's down.
Unable to block the flyers coming his way, Martin takes 8 damage and Callum moves to his end step. Here he exiles Olivia, which in turn exiles his Archmage, given that he no longer controls a legendary vampire. With almost half as many creatures as he had a moment ago, Callum passes the turn.
I begin my turn by playing Sacred Foundry, paying 2 life to have it enter untapped, and recast Daddy Edgar. Next I use my remaining mana to equip Skull Clamp to my commander and move to combat. Here I attack Jay with Edgar, putting a +1/+1 counter on both of my vampires as I do so. He double blocks with Oblivion Sower and Conduit of Ruin, and I choose to deal lethal damage to the conduit. Edgar is also destroyed, drawing me 2 cards, and I put another +1/+1 counter on Yeheni given that the creature I do not control died. Finding myself in a pretty perilous position, I end my turn.
In my upkeep I scry 2, and each of my opponents loses 2 life. I then play Homeward Path as my land for turn, milling Jay, Callum and Martin for 1, and curse Jay for not milling any of his massive creatures. Not to be deterred, I cast Fact or Fiction, asking Martin to sort the top 5 cards of my library into 2 piles. I put the pile containing Grave Titan and a land into my hand, and the other into my graveyard, and cast the aforementioned Titan using the last of my mana. I create 2 2/2 zombie tokens when the giant enters the battlefield, and each of my opponents mills 3 cards from the Altar of the Brood's triggers. Lacking the mana required to make a copy of the Eldrazi that Jay milled, I pass the turn to him.
Jay plays Tyrite Sanctum and pays a whopping 12 mana to cast It That Betrays.
We're in danger.
He then moves his 5-foot boots over to the newly cast Eldrazi and pays 2 life to Staff of Completion to help equip Whisper Silk Cloak to Pathways with Ulamog. Moving to combat, Jay attacks Callum with It That Betrays and his now 14/14 Skittering Cicada, and Alex with Pathways with Ulamog. Annihilator triggers occur, with Alex sacrificing 3 of his token creatures and Callum sacrificing Herald's Horn and his commander. I put 4 +1/+1 counters on Yeheni, and Jay gains control of the Horn thanks to It That Betrays. He names Eldrazi when the Horn enters the battlefield, but doesn't gain control of Tegwyll given that Callum puts the Duke back into his command zone. With Annihilator triggers resolved, Callum casts Aetherize, bouncing Jay's attacking creatures to his hand and causing him to sweat a little.
Good.
In his post-combat main phase, Jay activates Ugin's -3 ability, destroying the Scarab God in this way.
Rude.
Alex draws 2 from his Skull Clamp, and Callum draws 1 thanks to his Fairy Mastermind. With no mana and 2 blockers, Jay passes the turn.
Callum puts an 8-hour counter on Midnight Clock and Pleasant Island as his land for turn. Next he casts Kindred Discovery, naming Fairy, and casts Fairy Dream Thief. Callum surveils 1, keeping the top card of his library where it is, and then draws it thanks to his enchantment. He then casts Fairy Formation, drawing another card, and moves to combat. Callum attacks Jay with his Click and his Mastermind, drawing 2 cards and dealing him 5 damage. With Jay's life total now looking dangerously low, Callum ends his turn.
I start my turn by casting Vindicate, destroying Jay's Oblivion Sower and putting a +1/+1 counter on Yeheni. Next I cast Sorin, Imperious Bloodlord, and use his first +1 ability to give my lone vampire another +1/+1 counter, Death Touch and Lifelink until the end of my turn. Moving to combat, I attack Jay with my now 10/10 Yeheni, and not wishing to die, Jay blocks it with his Spirit. I gain 10 life, putting a +1/+1 counter on my Aetherborn, and Jay puts the card exiled by Ugin several turns ago into his hand. In my post-combat main phase, I tap my remaining lands to cast Wear and Tear, destroying Callum's Kindred Discovery and Alex's Altar of the Brood.
Not my altar!
With nothing more to do, I pass to Alex.
I play Field of the Dead as my land for turn, creating a zombie token when it enters the battlefield. Next, I equip Skull Clamp to my zombified Una and move to combat, where I attack Sorin with my Fairy, and Jay with Grave Titan. I create 2 more zombie tokens when the Titan attacks, Sorin's ulti is reduced to 0, and Jay takes a lethal amount of damage. In my post-combat main phase, I recast the Scarab God, and then cast Fleshbag Marauder. I sacrifice a zombie token to the Marauder's ETB, Callum sacrifices Fairy Dream Thief, and Martin curses me before sacrificing Yeheni.
You suck!
Happy with my position in the game, I pass the turn.
In his upkeep, Callum puts an 11th hour counter on his clock, and then pays 3 mana to put a 12th counter on it. He exiles the artifact, shuffles his hand and graveyard into his library, then draws a fresh hand of 7 cards before drawing an 8th card for turn.
Not bad for 3 mana.
Next, Callum plays a swamp and casts Into the Fey Court.
Deja vu.
He draws 3 more cards, creates a 1/1 fairy token, and casts Fairy Fencing. Callum gives the Scarab God -5/-5 in this way, sending it to the graveyard, and then moves to combat. Here he attacks Alex with his Puppeteer Clique and Fairy Formation, dealing him 8 damage. With nothing more to do, he discards number 7 and ends his turn, with Alex putting the Scarab God into his hand thanks to their ability.
Martin begins his turn by playing a swamp and taps out to recast Edgar Markov. Wishing to keep the Lord of Innistrad up as a blocker, Martin passes to me.
Alex plays Sunken Hollow, creating a zombie with Field of the Dead. He then recasts the Scarab God and moves to combat, where he attacks Callum with Grave Titan, Flashback Marauder, and 2 zombies. Grave Titan's ability triggers, creating Alex 2 new zombies, and Callum blocks the giant coming his way with his Fairy token. This results in the token's destruction, and Callum taking 7 damage before Alex passes the turn.
Callum starts his turn by playing Myriad Landscape and casts Vanquisher's Banner. He names Fairy, and then casts Hypnotic Sprite, drawing a card from his banner. Not yet finished, Callum casts Elvira, Dreaming Duelist, drawing yet another card, and casts Arcane Signet. Moving to combat, Callum attacks me with each of his creatures that are able to do so, and I activate my Una's ability. I force Callum to mill 6 cards, naming blue, and he mills a single blue card in this way. This creates me a 1/1 Fairy Rogue token with flying, which was definitely not worth the 6 mana I paid for it, and I block Fairy Formation in this way. The Rogue is destroyed, I take 7, and Callum ends his turn.
In my turn, I cast Stromkirk Captain, creating a vampire token with Edgar's Eminence ability. I then equip Skullclamp to my commander and cast Go for the Throat, targeting the Scarab God.
Rude.
Alex chooses to put his commander into the graveyard, and I move to combat, where I attack him with Edgar. I put a +1/+1 counter on each of my vampires, and Alex blocks with a measly zombie. Feeling like I am somewhat back in the game, I pass to Alex, who puts the Scarab God back into his hand before proceeding to his turn.
I play Darkwater Catacomb, creating a zombie as I do so, and move to combat. Here I attack Callum with everything that can, creating 2 zombies with Grave Titan as I do so. And Callum blocks the previously mentioned Titan and Una with his 2 untapped fairies. Before damage occurs, I activate Una's ability, where X is 12. I once again name blue, and Callum mills 4 blue cards, creating me 4 Fairy Rogue tokens.
That's still not great for 13 mana, you know.
Quiet you. Damage then occurs with both of Callum's blockers and Una being destroyed, and Callum takes 11 damage from unblocked zombies. I then draw 2 cards thanks to Skullclamp, and Callum also draws 1 as a result of his Mastermind's ability. Once again in possession of a respectable board state, I pass the turn.
Callum begins his turn by casting Kindred Dominance, wiping the board of all non-fairy creatures.
Good job I made those 4 fairies.
I draw 2 cards with Skullclamp, allowing Callum to draw 1 as well, and Callum casts Fairy Vandal. He draws a card thanks to Vanquisher's Banner, and still not finished, casts Dream Spoiler, drawing once more. Moving to combat, Callum attacks Alex, and Alex blocks Fairy Formation and Puppeteer Clique with a single Fairy Rogue each. The rogues are decimated, Alex takes 3, and Callum ends his turn. Alex responds to this by casting Force of Despair, except that card from his hand instead of paying its mana cost. This results in the destruction of both of Callum's untapped creatures, and I then move to my turn.
Martin starts his turn by playing Exotic Orchard and casts Felisa, Fang of Silver Quill. He makes a vampire token with Edgar, and then casts Vampire Hexmage, creating another vampire as he does so.
Edgar showed us exactly why he's just so powerful.
Not yet finished, Martin equips his Skullclamp to one of his newly created vampire tokens, killing it and drawing 2 cards. Callum also draws, and Martin casts Drana and Linvala, generating another vampire. Now in possession of multiple flying blockers, Martin passes to me.
In Alex's turn, he plays Reliquary Tower, creating a zombie. Callum responds to this trigger by casting Opt, scrying 1, and keeping the top card of his library where it is. He draws the card, and Alex moves to combat, where he attacks Callum with his 2 fairies. Lacking any blockers, Callum takes 2, and Alex moves to his second main phase. Here he attaches Skullclamp to one of his rogues, lowering its toughness to 0 and drawing 2 cards. Callum also draws a card thanks to his Mastermind, and Alex casts Diabolic Intent. He sacrifices his remaining fairy to the spell and searches his library for a super secret card before putting it into his hand. Next, Alex casts Noxious Gearhulk, destroying fairy formation with the construct CTB. He gains 5 life when the creature is destroyed, recasts the Scarab God for what feels like the billionth time, and passes.
Callum plays an island and casts Frantic Search. He draws 2, discards 2, and untaps the land that he used to cast the search before casting Likeness Looter. Callum draws, casts Fairy Dream Thief, and draws again. Still not finished, he casts Rankle, Master of Pranks, drawing yet another card, and casts Nimrus, Una's Trickster.
Stop!
Callum draws his 7th card of the turn, and finally after spells cast, moves to combat. He attacks me with Fairy Mastermind, Puppeteer Clique, and Rankle, and unable to block the flyers, I take lethal damage in this way. Callum then uses Rankle's attack trigger to make both Martin and himself discard a card, and with only one opponent left, ends his turn.
I start my turn by casting Olivia Voldarin, creating a vampire token as I do so. I use her ability to deal 2 damage to both Likeness Looter and Fairy Dream Thief, putting 4 +1/+1 counters on her, and equip Skull Clamp to my newly created vampire. The creature is destroyed, I draw 2 cards, and Callum draws 1. Next I cast Legion Lieutenant, creating another vampire token, but more importantly giving all of my vampires +1/+1. Moving to combat, I attack Callum if all of my creatures are able to do so, and put a +1/+1 counter on one of my vampire tokens with Felice's Mentor ability. Callum blocks Drana and Linvala with Nimrus, but unfortunately for him still takes lethal damage, winning me the game.
Well, that is it for another game. I hope that you enjoyed watching the Eldrazi player get what they deserved. I'd like to give a huge thank you to each and every one of our incredible patrons, without whom we'd be unable to continue making videos such as this. Also, be sure to check out our affiliate links in the video description. It won't cost you anything extra to buy your products through these, but it really helps out the channel. And finally, don't forget that you can help to support us in 4 quick and easy ways: liking this video, subscribing, hitting that bell icon, and leaving us a comment. I read every one. That's it for now though, we'll see you next time. Happy Halloween!